There's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I wanted to share it with you today, and that's the nutrition of food in general. And I'm not going to state all of the studies where I picked up the information that I'm going to give you, but if you just start doing a Google search of these things, there's tons of information out there, so you can go read up on for yourself if you like. One of the first things that I wanted to talk about was a study that was done around 1990, and this was new information for me that I didn't know about, that I just recently found. And this was really a startling eye-opener for me. And basically what the study said was that fewer than 3% of people had cancer in 1990, but by 1996, nearly 50% of people had cancer. And I think that is just a staggering number. It's mind-numbing to me. And granted, you know, the cancer diagnostic tools have improved, and more people are getting screened due to cancer awareness and education, but a study with a 47% increase over about a 5-year period tells me that something is dramatically wrong. There are other things going on here. Now, some studies that I was well aware of, which some of you may not be familiar with, is a study that was done in the 1930s here in this country. And we know that since the 1930s, what we're basically looking at is the nutrition of food before chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides. That's basically what this study was about. And we know that between the 1930s versus today, that the vitamin and mineral content in our food has dramatically decreased. And I don't mean it's decreased a little bit, I mean dramatically, significantly decreased. I'm going to give you some numbers in just a minute. And there's several thoughts on why this is occurring. And these all pretty much make sense to me. I'm sure they are all contributing factors. And one is that the soil is depleted of minerals because the chemical use of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus are being used to grow food. And it's being grown at a fast rate, and it's depleting the soil of the minerals in the soil, and they're not being replaced in any way. Another idea says that chemically produced foods don't stay in the ground long enough to absorb higher rates of vitamins and minerals compared to organic foods. So due to the quick growth of conventional grown produce, you know, it's not in the ground as long as the organics, therefore the organic food is more nutritious. That also makes a lot of sense to me. And just, you know, from my background, you know, as a crop science and that horticulture, you know, from the, you know, my background in the science, you know, these things all make sense with that science background that I have. Okay, another idea about the reason why the vitamins and minerals are not in our food today is that food is overprocessed and the nutrition has been removed during processing. Well, we also know that to be a true statement and a true fact. So I think all these things contribute to the problem. In short, we don't get enough nutrition in a, quote, balanced diet according to the USDA guidelines. And you're not going to have a balanced diet if the vitamins and minerals aren't there in your food to begin with. You know, this is a big problem. Now, there was a study that compared some vitamin and mineral contents. It compared things between 1963 to the year 2000. And There were several vegetables where information was listed on that, but I just chose one here to give you information about. When you look at collard greens, when they were grown from 1963 compared to the year 2000, collards had 61% less vitamin C in it than it did in 1963. It had 41% less vitamin A, 28% less calcium, 51% less potassium, and 84% less magnesium. Folks, you got to have those things in order for basic chemical processes to happen in your body every day. You know, you have to have that magnesium for cell growth to occur. You know, these are pretty staggering numbers. Now, there's lots of studies out there that support this information. And you'll find a decrease in nutrition in your meats too. It's not just your fruit and vegetable. And the reason for that is because the animal eats the grass that's fertilized with chemical fertilizers, and the soil's depleted. You know, it's just a cycle over and over. Now, modern medicine tells us that we should eat low fat, low salt, low sugar, high fiber, you know, all these different things. But we're still, you know, you're still going to have a problem. Even if you eat that way, you're still going to have a problem because the nutrition, there's not enough nutrition in that food. And, you know, the science part of my head tells me that, you know, eating this way makes sense. But then I think about my family heritage and my relatives for different generations. And, you know, in some ways it doesn't make sense because many of those people were farmers. And they lived a long time. They ate animal protein and animal fat. They had high caloric diets. And some folks would say, well, that's because they were farmers, you know, they burned all those calories. And that's a true statement. And they were up moving around. They weren't sedentary people. And that makes a big difference, I think. But I don't think it was just the type of work that they did. I think it had something to do with the free-range and grass-fed meat that they ate, the organic produce that they grew, the raw butter and buttermilk that they consumed, and the organic grain that they raised and milled locally. Now, when my dad was growing up, you know, he said if they didn't grow it, they didn't eat it. And that was just about a true statement. There were a few things that they purchased as far as food was concerned. They would purchase sugar for making jam and cobblers, salt and pepper, coffee, tea, and they would buy local honey because they did not raise honeybees. Now, I remember as a child when I went to visit my grandparents and I would go down into the basement that the entire north wall of the farmhouse was totally covered in 1 quart and half-gallon canning jars. Now, this was about a 27-foot wide area by about 6 feet tall, and the shelves were deep enough that you could fit 2 half-gallon jars, you know, deep, and 3 quart jars deep. And that was a lot of food. They produced a lot of food for the wintertime. And mind you, I said quart and half-gallon jars. There weren't any pint and a halves, there weren't any pints, there weren't any half pints. It was all quart and half-gallon jars. Now, the other thing that they did is that they stored their Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, and onions in a root cellar. So they had another area that was cool enough and damp enough where they could keep those items too. And then there was also a deep freeze, a big chest deep freezer. And that usually had a lot of corn in it. And then there was the smokehouse, which always had hams hanging in there. There was always pork. And the chickens, well, they were available and basically butchered as needed, depended on what you were going to eat for dinner that night. And when I think about it, this model makes sense to me. We know that grass-fed, free-range meat is much, much more healthier than raising an animal in a pen and feeding it grains that it typically wouldn't eat. The health benefits are pretty significant between the way you raise those two, the two cropping cycles, the way you do that. Science isn't lying to you when it tells you that grass-fed is better than grain-fed. Now we know that the flavor of fresh-picked food is phenomenal. Anybody who's had their own garden, they can attest to that. Because you can't beat cooking with fresh herbs and veggies. It's just so good, and makes me hungry right now just thinking about it. That juicy tomato that bursts with flavor tastes a whole lot different than that tomato that you buy from your grocery store. And the same goes for fresh picked corn. And even when it comes to frozen corn, the frozen corn that I put up, the way I process and put it up, tastes so much better than any frozen corn I've ever had, purchased from a grocery store, hands down. It doesn't matter if it's organic, inorganic, whatever. It's better. It tastes better. Now, the other thing that comes to mind is a fresh, unwaxed cucumber. That crispness, that snap, being able to eat that skin without that waxy coating on it. It's a whole different texture and mouthfeel, and it tastes better, quite frankly. That crunch just doesn't get any better. So, those of you that don't have gardens, but you might be thinking about gardening, I would encourage you to do so. You're going to have successes and failures, and it takes, time and research and knowledge and practice to be, to produce your own food and to do it well. But I think it's well worth the effort. And then another thing when it comes to producing your own food, there are a lot of things that I can't buy in a grocery store where I live. I have 3 grocery stores in my town, and there are a lot of things that I can't just walk in and buy. Things like arugula, mache, assorted different radishes. I can only buy 1 radish in my grocery store. And escarole, that's a rarity. I rarely ever find escarole in my grocery store, and these are all things that we like to eat, so I grow them. Now, study after study after study, shows that organic food is better than conventionally grown produce. There's many different foreign countries have done research. We've done research in this country, and they all say pretty much the same thing, that organic food is more nutritious. But I want you to think about something else. Food loses nutritional value from the moment it's picked. It's a living process. It's a living thing, and from the moment you pick it, that begins to degrade. Consider that most food travels, on average, depends on what numbers and what research you're looking at, and I'm picking the low number here. On average, your food travels 1,500 miles before you eat it. That's a pretty significant number of miles that things are traveling. And the other thing you have to consider is, how long ago was that produce picked? Has it been in cold storage for 6 months? Was it picked 2 weeks ago? And how much nutrition is still left in that? So what I really want you to think about, the takeaway message here is, eat seasonally, eat organic, and eat homegrown whenever possible.